Oh, the mic wasn't working. Never mind. We'll ignore that whole introduction where I've said hi to everyone. But hey, this is the fun of doing a stream by yourself. I was just saying hey to everyone. So how's it going, guys? Let me know if you can hear me now. Hopefully the mic should be working now. This is the thing. This is the problem. It's been a minute since I've done a live stream. So maybe we can just pretend that first bit didn't happen. And I'll just say hi to you all again. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Maxon Trainer YouTube channel. Glad you can all hear me now. And hey to everyone in the chat. So I'll just repeat that quick bit that only I heard originally. So hey to Ravi, hey to George, Lux Motion, Artix Music, Dances for Peas, Film Butler. Hey to everyone in the chat. Glad the audio is working now, because you know that would have been a bit of an issue with a live stream, wouldn't it? So yeah, it's good to see you all. I thought I'd come back and do a little bit of a September live stream, get back to those monthly live streams that I used to do. And yeah, today we're going to be doing this kind of like fun loopable shockwave effect. And this is actually something that I ended up demoing quite a bit at IBC. So if anyone was at IBC in Amsterdam, then this is effectively what I was showing. But I'm going to do a full breakdown of it. So yeah, let me show you. Let's just play this through in case you haven't seen this. This is the concept of what we're going to be creating, but we're not going to do the whole thing. We're going to do kind of like the first two parts of it. So the first two transitions. So just this little kind of fun sports reel looking at these transitions, mostly between these textures. This is something that I'd been thinking about playing around with inside of Redshift, just finding this sort of transition between these different materials. I think it looks really nice, and it's actually pretty easy to do. And so what we're going to do, we're going to create, like we said, the whole thing from scratch. We're going to focus on sort of a few different parts. The first part is creating a procedural shockwave, so that's the shockwave that happens. And that's going to be with MoGraph fields, and it's very easy to do. So I'm going to show you how to do that using fields and some fun little tricks that hopefully you haven't come across before. And then we're going to dive into creating that grass growth. But the main focus there is actually then creating vertex map growths. And those vertex maps are going to be created based on the field elements. So we're going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting here. And this is why it's going to be loopable and procedural. And then we're going to take those vertex maps and we're going to use them to create dynamic and animating textures. So I suppose we should probably get into it. As always, you know, if you have any questions on anything, just let me know in the chat. It's only me here, hence why we've already had technical issues 10 seconds into the stream. So yeah, help me out here and just write maybe question, or just sort of if I miss it, just write it a few times in there and I'll make sure I get to those questions for you. Cool, so we'll start off just by building this whole thing from scratch. Let's just switch off my lighting. So this is just going to save me a little bit of time later on because we've got a few things to go through. So we've got our plane here and we're just going to make this a little bit bigger. So let's set this to 500 by 500. And for now, we'll go 100 by 100 segments. We will be changing this later on, but like we said, we're keeping it procedural. So we can change that. That's not going to be a problem. So what we're going to do, let's just name this the ground. We're going to create this shockwave or this ripple, and there are loads of great tutorials or trainers and educators who've shown how to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take it a little step further. So the way that we do that is we can take a plane effector, and in case anyone doesn't know, we can actually use effectors as deformers. So within the effector itself, if we just come down to the deformer option, we can actually say whether we want it to deform the object, the points, or the polygons. And in our case, we're just going to set this to points. And then, of course, as we know, inside of C4D, the way that a deformer then works is it's a child of the object that we want it to deform. So we're going to call this shockwave. We're going to keep things nice and organized. And so we can see now we've just got this movement on here. But what we want to do is we want this to go up. And so based on the transform space, we're just going to put it in the position Z. And so now we can see as we switch that off and on, we can see that is now going in the correct orientation. But what we want to do is we want to create the impression of a shockwave or a ripple. And so in order to do that, we want a certain part of my ground plane to be affected by this plane effector. And so a lot of what we're going to be doing today, especially in this first section, is going to be in the fields menu. We're going to be diving in and doing a bunch of cool stuff inside of here. And so if I'm thinking of a shockwave or that ripple shape, I can come into my field objects and I can see what I think is going to create that shape for me. And for me, that's going to be that torus field. And so we can see we're now getting that nice shape. But the thing is, it doesn't really look like a ripple just yet. Even if we animate the radius, which is what we're eventually going to be doing, we don't have this nice smooth motion, this nice smooth curvature here on my ripple. And so how do we do that? How do we actually make this ripple look nice? This is going to be the first part. So we go into our torus field. So we're in our plane effector, we're in our fields menu, and we're in our torus field. So these are things that we have selected right now. And then in my remap, if I pull this up a little bit more, we can have some more room to play with. We can see my remapping for my values. And this shape here is this shape here, right? So this is effectively what is being drawn onto the remap of my torus field. So what we can do is we can actually smooth all this out by coming down to our contour and just set my mode to curve. And then if I look at my curve, and if I take a look at this, we can start to smooth this out. And we don't want this flat top, right? We don't want this sort of plateau flat effect. We want it to be nice and round, nice and smooth, like a wave. And so the first thing we want to do is we're going to remove that inner offset. And so now we're a little bit closer. And then we can just take both of our points. So if I click and shift click, we can just pull these in. And we're now getting this nice, smooth rounding on my edge. And all of that is just done inside of that remapping option in my torus field. So I've got my torus field, right? So we've got this part done. And how do we create a ripple? Like I said, there's a lot of different tutorials by a lot of great people showing how to do this. And what we're going to do is we come into our torus field, into our field. All we want to do is animate the radius. And this is going to give us that initial ripple. So think of maybe throwing a pebble or a stone into the water and how we get those water ripples. This is what we're creating, at least to start with. So let's give ourselves some more keyframes. So some more space on my timeline. Maybe we'll go to 250 frames. And then we'll want our first shockwave or our first wave to happen at about frame 20. And the reason for that is we're also going to be creating the transition between the ball, whether that's the football, soccer, if you're American, and then a basketball. So we don't want my ripple to start straight away. So I'm going to kick off the radius at frame 20 at 0 centimeters. So we've set that keyframe. And then let's say frame 70, so about 50 frames later, that entire shockwave, that first whole shockwave, is going to hit the edge of my plane. And I know, having done this a few times now at IBC, that 400 centimeters is going to go to the very edge, and then we can just hit another keyframe. So I've set a keyframe at 20 and at 70. And now as we go back and we press play, we can see it's not looking too interesting, but we are getting somewhere. We've started with this initial ripple. And what we can do is, instead of creating another torus field and another torus field to create, more waves that then fade out, we can actually, inside of our fields menu, use the delay filter. So these are our modifier layers, and we'll be using a couple of these today, but they add some additional parameters and some additional sort of animation in our case to this. And so it's very similar to the delay effector. If you've used that, we can set it to spring mode and we can increase the effect strength. And it's just going to repeat our effect a little bit more. So we can see we're now getting that secondary ripple happening. But the thing is, I want to have slightly bigger waves. And so with my delay, I'm actually going to send my blending mode to add. So now we get these bigger waves happening. But what happens is, let me just press play and let me come to here. Okay, cool. So we've set this to add. But now what's happening is we're now getting that plateau effect again. And what this is doing is the remap is now, as we're sort of adding this delay and this spring effect, my values are still hitting the clamp. So the min and max clamped values are being reached. Therefore, we get that plateau effect. What we want to do is we want to go past those min and max values on our original torus field. And so this little teeny tiny icon that you may not have noticed before is going to allow us to disable the clamping of those values. So I can uncheck that, and now we can see we get this really big wave or this big ripple happening thanks to our delay. There we go. So that's looking far better now than it was before. Let me just switch off my work plane. And now we can see this, what we have. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. But the thing is, when my shockwave first happens, or this wave one happens, let's call this wave one because we'll create a second one in a minute. When this first wave happens, it's far too intense. The strength of my torus field is too intense straight away at the beginning. And so what we can do some more little keyframe tricks here by animating the strength at the very beginning and the very end. So we have a gradual fade in of strength or intensity and then a gradual fade out. And so the way that we can do it is, of course, we're going to start with a strength of 0%, set a keyframe, and then maybe you can choose how gradual you want that to be. For me, I'm just going to set it to 5 frames, and I'm going to now add a keyframe there. So we have strength on 0, then that goes to 100% over 5 frames. And then I'm actually going to do the reverse. So then 5 frames before it hits its peak, I'm then going to set this back down to that 100 and 0. So we get a little fade in and then a little fade out. Cool. So what's the next step in this? Well, the next step in our case was actually to create a setup that had multiple waves happening. Because if I bring back the animation, what we can see is we get, as the ball hits, we get our wave. I ended up doing a mini wave in the middle, but we're not going to worry about that today. The concept is the same. And then it comes down again when it spins, and we create a second wave. And then we create a third and a fourth. But for the sake of the live stream, for the sake of the tutorial, we're only going to be doing 2 transitions today. But it is all repeating the same effect over and over again. Okay, and my camera's gone. I've been having issues with my camera. There we go. It might just pop in and out. If it continues to do it, I'll remove myself. It won't be a problem. So the great thing with this setup is it's all procedural and it's all controlled via keyframes and via our fields menu, which makes our life easier because we're able to duplicate and copy and paste and just drag keyframes. So I originally tried to do this with cloth in simulation, and it just became too much of a challenge. And so this is far more controllable and flexible than working with simulation. So let's just hit save, and then let's look at how we can create a second wave. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy and paste this. So you can command or control click and drag, or you can command or control C and then V to copy and paste. And then we get the torus field again with the keyframes attached to it as this second wave. And then all we need to do, because it doesn't then duplicate in the fields menu if we do it this way, we just need to drop it inside of here and then make sure you set this blending mode to max. So we're able to see this second wave. And then within my dope sheet, I can then come into my wave 2, and we can see we have my keyframes and they're all selected. So if I just click wave 2, it selects them all, and then I can just drag where I want this next wave to happen. So let's say on frame 90, we want this second wave to happen. So when we press play, we have the first wave, and now we have the second wave. And so if we want to do it again and again and again, we can just copy and paste and do this same thing, and then make sure we move our keyframes. Like we said, we're only going to be worrying about doing 2 of these transitions for now because the concepts are the same. So the thing is, when I created this effect, it looks fine, right? But I wanted it to look more like cloth. And so we can do some extra little tricks to create some additional turbulence and movement, as well as some little cloth ripples that's going to give this more of an impression of cloth and fabric, which is what I was going for, instead of a water ripple like this. And so the way that we can do this is, if I just switch off my delay, inside my fields menu, we can also take a shader field. So if you've used a shader field before, most of the time you've probably used it with some type of noise shader to create, some randomness, variation, some turbulent noise. Well, what we're going to do actually is we're going to be using the color channel from a standard material to create ripples within my object, within my ground. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to need to take advantage of not only a standard material, but also the projection within the material tag. And so we'll look at how this is going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this on a copy of our ground. So if I just delete that, and then if I just switch this whole thing off, this is going to be my cloth ripples. And we need a new material, but we need a standard material, not a Redshift one. So a little quick trick for this is we can just flick our render back to standard, double click, and then flick it back to Redshift. And now we have a standard material here, which is what we can read the color channel from. So if I switch off my reflectance and then I drop that on my cloth ripples, we have to think about the shape of how we want our ripples to look. And we want them to be going out to in. So we want our ripples to be focusing on that inside of my cloth. And that's why we're doing it this way. That's why we're doing this setup this way, because what we can do is we can set this to noise. And so we can see we have our noise over the top, and maybe we can just go NA just so we can see that noise. And then in my projection, so within my material tag, within my projection, if I set it to something like spherical, we can see we're now getting that projection going in. And then if I click my noise, 2 main things we want to do here. First of all, we want to make sure our space is set to UV2D. And then our global scale, as I pull this down, you'll start to see how this is going to look more and more like cloth ripples. So maybe we'll go to something like 8. And then maybe we'll just reduce this contrast a little. And think of this kind of like a bump map. This is what we're creating. We're kind of creating a cloth ripple bump map that's readable inside my MoGraph fields menu. So we'll leave this like that for now. We might come in and change it later on, or we might be happy with how it looks now. So let's now hide my cloth ripples because we just want to be reading the material. So I can bring all of this back. We can go back into my plane. And so my shader field is going to be my cloth, cannot spell today, cloth ripples. And then within here, our channel is going to be color. And then when we set the channel to color, it then is asking for a material tag. So then what we can do is we can drag in the material tag, and now we can see that we're starting to get some kind of ripples, right? Cool. So I'm not too worried about them looking too low resolution at the moment. We could maybe just up that, and then perhaps we could increase the segments a little bit. We don't want to go too high because we can do a lot of this in the Redshift object tag. Maybe we'll go back into the material and we'll just lower the contrast. So we can see as we lower, increase and decrease that contrast, how this is going to look. So maybe something like this. And like we said, we can fix a lot of this later on when we do our texturing. So within my plane, what I want to do is I want my ripples to kick in. You know what? I'm actually going to turn my camera off because it is causing. Did we lose audio again? We're having some technical issues today. This is not good. Maybe what we'll try and do, let me just set this to this camera. Here we go. So I think I'm having issues. I use like a Canon digital SLR, and it keeps kind of like disconnecting and reconnecting. So maybe we'll stick to this. So hi everyone, my audio should now work fine, but my camera does not look very nice. But hey ho, we'll go with it. Also, thank you to everyone in the chat who is helping me out here and telling me about the audio and the sound. I really appreciate it. You guys are the best. Cool. So I'll just repeat that last bit just because I'm not sure at what point the audio would have gone. But basically what we wanted to do is we wanted to change our blending mode to overlay. So originally it was set to something like max. And so we can see it straight away. What we want to do is we want to set it to overlay. So as my ripple happens, then my cloth ripples, as my torus field happens, my cloth ripples kick in as well. And then if we add our delay to this, we then get something that looks a little bit like this. So it's looking a lot more like a cloth style effect. Okay. So the final thing we want to do is we can also add a little bit of cloth-like turbulence as well. So like I said, a lot of this is all being done within the actual fields menu itself. And so the final bit would be just to grab ourselves a random field. Again, we'll just switch the delay off just while we're working so we can see this nice preview. And in the random field, we're just going to increase our scale. So we can see we have this more of a turbulent noise and turbulent effect over the surface. And then we can even combine it with a little bit of animation speed. So as we press play, if I make this really dramatic, you can see that we get this as well. So we can see we get this movement, this animation. And then we can just set this to multiply. And then we'll just switch that order there and then switch our delay back on. And now we should get, maybe that was the right order, something a bit like this. There we go. There we go. So we just had to switch our delay back on. Maybe we don't want too much animation speed. And now we can see we get this effect going on that looks much more like cloth than if we just had this setup. So that's what was the original setup. And then with our cloth ripples and a little bit of turbulence, we can see we get something that looks a little bit like this. So as always, don't forget, if you have any questions, turbulence, then feel free to let me know in the chat and I will help with those. Okay, so the next step that we want, so we've done our cloth ripple, right? So we've done this shockwave effect. So all I did was I had this repeat 4 times. So I had 4 waves in the final project file. I'll show you that in a little bit. But all we're doing now is we're doing the first half. So we're doing the first 2 waves. And then we have this grass growth. So this was a little extra part, and this uses vertex maps. And these same vertex maps are going to be used to create the transition between our materials as well. So they're going to come in handy later on. And we can use all the stuff that we've already created in order to do these. So we'll start off by creating the grass elements. And if you've never really used the asset library or the asset browser, I am a massive fan. We have loads of models, textures, pre-made assets you can use that are all ready for Redshift as well. Things like grass. And if you search grass and then you search red for Redshift, it should give you all of the Redshift equivalent assets. So in here, we can see this little icon here is our new Redshift icon. And what we're going to do is let's just take a few of these grass elements. So we'll do all the mid-size ones. So I'm just double clicking these and they're going to add into my scene. So we have these little grass elements here. And if we just come a little bit closer, we can see them. And the way that we can add a load of these over the surface of my ground plane, which is what we want to do, we can take our MoGraph cloner, and then we can just drag and drop those objects into the cloner. And we're going to make these, set these to the bottom of my objects manager. So this is my cloner. And then what we want to do is, because we're actually animating this via MoGraph, we're not using dynamics or simulation or anything like that, we can set the instance mode within my cloner to multi-instance. We can then set my mode to be object. And when we set it to object, we can say which object do we want to clone our grass over. And that's going to be our ground. So we can see we have our grass elements. And at the moment, they're actually, because of the transform space, they're just kind of laid on their side. So what we can do is we can transform them as a whole inside the cloner. So we can just, so minus 90, and it's going to put them right back into the correct orientation. And then because we're using multi-instance mode, we can have a lot of grass. We have 20,000 grass elements here, and it works absolutely fine. And so a few things I am going to do is, in my cloner, and this is just personal preference to make things look a little bit nicer and a little bit more varied. In my cloner, my clone mode, my clones inside of here, we're going to set to random. And so it's going to randomly distribute between 1, 2, and 3 each time, as opposed to going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and iterate between them. And then in my cloner, I'm also going to add some randomness, but ideally not position, right? We don't want to randomize our position. We want to randomize our rotation. So we're going to set a little bit of rotation here, a little bit of rotation here, a little bit of uniform scale as well. And now we've just added a little bit of random variation. So these don't look like all of the same clone being duplicated over and over and over again. Okay, so we've got our grass. How do we now use our torus field waves to make the grass appear and then disappear with these waves? And so the idea behind this grass is as the football, and I'm going to call it a football because I'm English and I play football, but it's also a soccer ball if you're American. So as the football comes down, I wanted then the ground to turn into basically a football pitch of like dirt and of grass. And then as the basketball comes down, it then turns into a basketball court. Then the F1 helmet comes down, it turns into a track. That's the idea behind this. So what we want to do is we want, as the football pitch appears, we need the grass to grow. And then as the basketball pitch appears, we need the grass to disappear. And we can do that with the waves that we've already created. And so we'll switch off the grass for now, and we'll just hide that. And so we can do this with vertex maps. And like I said, these vertex maps, when we create them now, they're also going to be how we do the transition inside of the texture as well. So on my ground, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to add a vertex map. And a very important step is to name the vertex maps if you're doing more than one transition. So we call this wave 1 vertex map. We go into our fields menu, and then we want to do a couple of things. So we want to create a growth based on our torus field. So to create a growth, we add a freeze layer, and we set it to grow. And let me just pull this up a little bit. And then we want it to grow based on this first wave. So I'm just going to drag and drop that torus field in and set it to max. And so within my grow, the radius is going to look at points within a 10 centimeter radius, and it is going to grow to those. So I'm going to set this to something like 5. And then my effect strength will control how fast this effect happens or how fast this growth happens. So when we press play, the torus field happens, and now we can see we get that growth from red to yellow, which is a weight of 0 to 100%. And then what we need to do is just do the same thing. So we can copy our vertex map. We can rename this wave 2 for our second vertex map. Delete our wave and add in wave 2 and just repeat everything we just did. And so then what we have, if I press play, we have our first wave, and then we have our second wave as our vertex map. And again, we can do a third and a fourth and a fifth, however many we want to, based on the waves that we have within my scene. So if we bring back our cloner, how can we now use these vertex maps to make the grass appear as my football pitch transition happens? Well, first of all, we need to actually use an effector that is going to allow me to control the scale. And so with my cloner selected, we can add a plane effector. And this is going to be my grass growth. So we want to name this because we actually have 2 plane effectors now. We have our plane Shockwave and we have our plane for our grass. And then we just want to switch off our position, and instead we want to switch on our uniform scale. And if we scale something down by -1, we scale it down entirely and it disappears. And this is a really easy way of creating a scaling up and down growth effect. And the thing is now, how do we actually use what we've done to scale my grass up or down with this torus? Well, we've created our vertex maps already, and those are the things that we need to use within this plane, within this grass growth. So we're going to add wave 1, and then as we play wave 1, you'll see that we're getting the opposite effect. We're getting the grass scaling down. What we want it to do is scale up. So nice and simply, we can come back to our modifier layers, and we can actually just invert our vertex map. And now as you press play, we'll have our grass scale up. And then the next trick is to use that next vertex map. So our vertex map 2, and set it to add. So now our grass should grow with the first one, and then it should disappear with the second one. And so this is the trick behind creating that grass growth that also matches my 2 shockwaves. So we've got about, my plan is to hopefully do all this within, the 60 minutes, within an hour. And so from now, what we'll do is we'll leave this as it is. We've got our 2 shockwaves, we've got our grass transition, we've got our ripples happening. So now let's have a look at that really simple animation between the football, the basketball, then the F1 helmet, and then the volleyball. And so if I just bring these on here, so what I can do is let me just zero out these. There we go. And then put these back into my null. Everything is going to be done. So actually what I might do, let's just pull that out and let's just zero out the null as well. Everything is actually controlled via a single null. So if I go to the original project file, and we can see this animation that we have here, all of this is done via a null object. I'm not animating the individual objects themselves. So let's take a look at how we can do this. And so I'm actually going to bring in my dope sheet. And the thing is, I'll be honest with you guys, I don't do too much keyframe animation. I love simulation. It's just who I am. And so this was a nice little fun experiment for me to get more into keyframing. And I know there are some people who go crazy with it. This is a very simple keyframe setup, but for me, it was nice to be able to, dive in a little bit more to it. So what we'll do is we're just going to keyframe. This is going to be our ball animation controller. Everything that we do, let's just switch off my cloner. Everything we do is going to be animating this null object only, not the individual ball. And so let's start off a little bit higher. So maybe go something like 50 centimeters. And on frame, let me just move over. On frame 0, we can set a keyframe on frame 50. So this is our starting point. And then just before I want the ball to go down and trigger the shockwave, I'm going to set another keyframe. And then just after my shockwave happens, so remember frame 20 is where we start that first wave or that shockwave. So about frame 22, we can set this to maybe something like 12 or maybe 11. And then on frame 30, we want it to jump back up, right? So maybe we can jump back up to 35 or maybe back up to 50. Let's go back up to 50 and we set a keyframe. So what we've done is we've set a keyframe on 50 centimeters on the Y. Then again on frame 18, still 50, right? Because then it's going to come down and it's going to set a keyframe to 11 centimeters in height, and then it's going to go back up to 30. And so what we have is that. So it looks like it's creating or triggering that shockwave. So the idea is it's not, but we're faking the effect. Because we know it's all timed via keyframes, I know when I need the ball to hit down. And one more thing we are going to do. So inside of here, we can go to our F curves and we can have a look at our position and we can click H. And then what we can do is in here, we can actually pull this right in, and we could even set another keyframe. So we could maybe pull this in if we wanted to. So maybe we don't want to go up, we want to go along something like this. And then this keyframe here, if I pull this all the way in and make this quite tight, what's going to happen is it's going to come down and go up really quickly again. So it's going to give the impression that it's creating more of a bounce. So now when we press play, we can see the down and up happens a lot faster than before, right? So then what we need to do is we can then say, okay, now, when do we need this to happen again? Well, we know on frame 90, we need it to happen again. So we can set a keyframe on the position Y on 50, and then we're just repeating the same thing. So on frame 92, we'll set a keyframe at 11, and then maybe on 96, we can go back up to 50, and then we're going to do the same thing again. So we're going to have a look at the position, and we can see the difference between this F curve and this F curve. So let's just go in here. So you can use your same 1, 2, and 3. So if anyone's not spent too much time in the dope sheet or the F curve doing your keyframing, you can do your same 1 and 2. So I can click and hold 1 and click and hold 2. And then we're just going to squidge this in again. So we get that same bounce effect. So we get the bounce and then we get the bounce again. Cool. And yes, as Hot Zen Master says, can you also copy and paste the keyframes? Yes, you can do. So what's nice about this setup is a lot of it is just copy and paste and copy and paste. And so if you do want a little bit of variation, then you could keyframe the next bit by hand if you want to, or like that, if you want everything to be the same, then you can copy and paste. That is not a problem. That's what's so nice about working with keyframe animation. It's a little bit more to set up, but it's so much more flexible and it's so much more controllable, which is really nice. Okay, so the next bit was then just to do this rotation. And so because it's all done within the controller, we can animate as this comes up. So we know this comes up to maybe frame 26. And I'm going to set a keyframe on my RH, which is my heading, which is this one here, if I show you that. And then as we come in, maybe on, what should we do, frame 70, I'm going to set this to, I want to do 4 rotations. So if, like me, you're not the best at maths, I know 360 degrees is a full rotation. So if I want 4 of them, I can do an asterisk 4 and then press that, enter, and then that gets me 4 rotations. And then I can keyframe that. So now we have this going down and it spins and it goes down again. And then maybe we'd want it to spin again, ready for the next one. So we could say, okay, set a keyframe here. And then however many frames later, so let's say our next transition happens at 150. We just want to times that by 2 and do another rotation. So we should have it bounce, spin, stop, bounce, spin, and then it will stop and it will carry on for those next rotations. And so the trick here is it all looks a little bit too uniform. And so just like inside of the plane where we add the delay, we can kind of do the same thing with keyframes. And we can do it with a track modifier tag. So on my ball animation controller, which is where I have set up my keyframes for this, I'm just going to right click. I'm going to search track. And inside my animation tags, we have the track modifier tag. And we can just apply a level of spring, just like the way we did in my Shockwave and my Ripple. And it's going to apply a little bit of that extra additional bounce and movement, which is exactly what we want. And then the final bit is transitioning between the sports elements. So we can see as we play, it spins and transitions, and then it spins and transitions. And what's so nice about this effect is it's so simple. Because the spin covers up the transition, all we do is animate the visibility of the different objects. It is as simple as that. And so inside of here, we can define roughly where we want that to be. So at sort of like between when the spin happens, which is sort of from here to here. So maybe we could say, I don't know, roughly like 49 or maybe 40. We could do 39 and 40 or anything like that. Let's do 44 and 45. So at 44, we want the basketball to be off. And we want the Nike flight ball to be on. And then at 45, we want the Nike ball to be off and we want the basketball to be on. So it's just like this. And so as you press play, it's going to come down and spin and then it changes. And then we just do that again for the next one and the next one. And so if we come in here, this is what mine ended up with. And so basically I've got 4 different sets of waves and then I created a mini wave in the middle. So that's what is being animated here. And then we have just the visibility of the different objects. We then have the ball transition and all of that is being controlled inside of here. And it's everything that we just did. And so as we kind of play this through, we can see we have it bounce down and then it starts to spin, then it transitions here, then it bounces down again, and then it starts to spin, and then it transitions again here. And it just does that again and again and again over 4 different transitions. Okay, so the final step in this is then to look at how we could create the texture changes, right? Because that's what we've got here. We've got this texture changing happening as this shockwave happens. And we've already created our vertex maps. So we know we can already begin to create that. Okay. So what we can do is let's just switch this off for now and switch this off for now, because all of this we just want to worry about in the actual material itself. And let's go into our render view. So we're going to start off with some Redshift stuff now. And within here, let's look for our camera. So I've got some pre-set up lighting and I'll talk you through it because it's really, really simple. It is a dome light with a HDR image. Let's just kick that off. So dome light with a HDR image, there is an area light and there is a target, and then there is just the Redshift camera. That's all that we have going on in here. And so, like we said, we want to create this transition using these vertex maps. And so what we want to do is we're actually just going to take assets from the asset library, but you can do this with your own materials and your own textures. So I know there's a good, I think it's ground texture. And let's go search Redshift again. And we have this ground. So let's double click that. And let's apply that to my scene. And let's kick this off. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Let's come in and we'll have a little look at this so we can actually remove that. And what we have is a relatively simple material, right? It's just being controlled by a few texture maps. And we can scale these down. If we think this mapping isn't great, we can just adjust the scale of these. And this is where we're actually going to start. Our entire setup is going, all textures, is going to be in one material. This is the trick behind this. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to create a little bit of space for ourselves. So this is our displacement. So displacement is going to be a slightly different thing. So we're going to pull this in here And then we're just going to call this ground displacement. And then with this, because it's all going to be controlled in the same material, I just want to group those nodes together. So we have everything nice and neat. We have all of those texture maps within a group. And then we have just the standard material node here, which is what we want. And we're just going to call this ground. And so how do we now animate and transition between these textures? And the way that we're going to do it is we know our vertex maps have been created connected to our fields. So we know as we come in and we sort of play this through, and then we have this come through to create that second option. So maybe this needs to go a little bit further down. So as we kind of come down, maybe we want it to go down a bit more. So let's 22. Do you want it to go a bit further? That's fine. No, we'll leave it like it is, but hey ho. I'd want it to go a little bit further down, but we'll leave it as it is for now. So as this happens, we want to animate between our textures. So let's switch this off. And let's switch our grass off, just so we can see this texture map. That's what we want to be able to see. Right, let's get it. Let's pause it at a point. There we go. Right, we're going to pause it at a point where we can see it. And in here, we can do a bit of a blended setup. So the way that we can create a transition inside of Redshift is using the material blender. So the material blender is going to allow me to blend between up to 7 different materials. And each of my materials is going to be my new transition. So in the original, we went from sand for football pitch and grass to wooden planks for basketball to a asphalt track for F1 and then to sand again for the volleyball. And so it ended up being a loop. What we're going to do is we're going to create a standard gray material, just like a default gray, just so we can see this first transition. And that will connect to the base color of my material blender. So we'll now see this will overtake, okay? And then what we'll do, we'll just mute the displacement for now, because we'll worry about that. Also, hey to Dustin. Hey, shout out Dustin, how's it going? It's been a while. Miss you too, miss your face always. Thanks for joining. Then what we want to do is my first wave transition is going to transition into my ground material. So then I set that to my layer 1, which is my second material. And then what we want to do is we want to control the blend color, which is a mask. It's basically just like a mask in Photoshop. And we want to control this blend color with that vertex map. So we can use vertex data by stealing the vertex attribute node. And then now you're going to see why naming your vertex maps is going to help us out, right? So we know this is going to be wave 1 and we connect that to my blend color. And now you can see we get in from that base gray. So this is my original material into that ground. We then get that transition happening. But now how do we do that next option, right? How do we then go and create that second option, which was then, we know if we click wave 2, we know this comes down and we kind of have this going on. So we'll keep it all playing in my render view so we can see it. And for this, we're just going to create our plank material. I want to show you how quick and easy. So this is my wood. And I'm just going to solo this, right? And we're going to throw in some texture maps. So wood planks. And this is actually a texture from Grayscale Gorilla. There are wooden plank materials inside of the asset library. The reason I'm not using them isn't because they're not good. They're amazing, but they're very detailed and technical, right? And all of this I'm doing inside of a single material. So I don't want a really crazy elaborate material. I'll open one up and I'll show you it later. I want these nice, simple materials with only a few nodes that control them. That's what we want. So love them. They are fantastic and they're very customizable. But like I said, we want something nice and easy, especially in a live stream. So we can just connect these together. So we can do base color, we can do roughness. This is roughness, right? Yeah, this is roughness. And then maybe we just want a little bit of bump map going on in here. So we can just set that to tangent space normal and then plug those in. Cool. We now have our wooden planks material. And the only other thing I'm going to do is we want to add that nice glossy coating, right? Just like a nice basketball court would have. And so this is our next material. And again, you know, we can just right click, we can group our nodes and keep it nice and neat and tidy. And then a lot of this is repetition. This is what I love about this setup. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. So we can bring in our second layer, which then becomes our wood. And then between our wood, we then need that next vertex map. So we can take vertex map 2, plug that into our blend, just like we did before. Now we see we get that blend, right? We're now getting between the dirt. We're then getting that. And if we switched on our cloner, so we get our grass as well, we can see this is kind of the effect that we have going on. Let's switch that back off. So before we wrap up, so I luckily I didn't promise that this would only be an hour, but we are very close to the end. And then I'll have a little look through any questions just in case. But let's look at how we can look at our displacement, because like we said, you know, we have our displacement in here and we can see we're getting displacement straight away, right? We're getting this ground displacement happening at all times. So how do we then animate the transition also between our displacement? Because that's what we're going to want to do as well. We don't want one displacement map for all of our materials because that's very unlikely. And it's the same concept, right? We use a displacement blender. So just like our material blender, just like this guy here, we can do it with this guy here. We can blend between up to 3, or what's this word? 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of displacement. I love that we have base and then layer 0, just to confuse you. So 4 layers of displacement we can blend between. And I'm going to teach you a little trick here, right? So if you want to blend between a material that has no displacement into one that does, we can do this trick where we take just a simple color node and then a displacement node, and a color of 50% gray is no displacement. So we get no displacement in the positive or the negative direction. And so what we can do is we can use this as our base layer. So our original gray, or you know, any color that any material that we're using with no displacement, we can use this. We can then blend between my ground displacement, which is what we'd have. And so let's maybe go and we'll play through a little bit. So we can perhaps see something like this. There we go. So now we can see this effect. If I just plug in my displacement, so replace that displacement, and then what we need to do is you can use the same vertex attribute data, so that same mask data, and now we're able to blend between no displacement and our ground displacement. Or we can do the same thing with multiple different displacement layers. So I'll show you this on my final project file, because I want to show you how it's everything that we've just talked about, everything we've just shown is exactly what we did in this final one. So let me just, I've played the render view, which we don't necessarily have to do, but we could come into here and we can see what have we got. Wave. So what we have here is main waves 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are also controlling vertex maps 1, 2, 3, and 4. We then have mini waves, we then have cloth ripples, we then have variation or turbulence. Everything is controlled within this one material. So this actually isn't even needed. So if I kick this off, and we don't even need to have the vertex map selected, What we have here is a material blender that goes between sand, dirt, wooden planks, track, which is our sort of like F1 track, and then sand again. And it's everything that we just looked at. So it's our standard material for our dirt. It's our next vertex map. We then have our wooden planks that we set up, which is courtesy of GSG, and then some more vertex maps. Again, some sand. I think this is also GSG. So yeah, shout out Grayscale Gorilla. Love their assets, but also love the asset library too. Then we also have this track, which I think I just built from scratch inside of here. And then we have our waves. And then we have the displacement blender. So it seems a little bit crazy, but it's just using the same vertex maps as masks, right? So we go from displacement sand to displacement dirt to displacement, which is that no displacement, which is that color, back into a displacement blender. So this is another trick. You can do a blender within a blender. So, you know, if you want to add more materials or add more displacements, you can do that too. That is not a problem. And so if I play it through, we can kind of see this is what we're able to have created inside of here. And we can do like a subdivision surface or something like that. And so this whole setup was just repeated 4 times. So something just like this, and it just spins. And so all of this is just the techniques that we just looked at between our different textures. It's lit in the same way. It's textured in the same way, just like that. So I know we're kind of like at the hour, but let me just go through and have a look at your comments. So Mr. Keyframe said about lowering prices. You know what? You're not the only person that feels like this. And we do actually always share feedback and your thoughts. So yeah, keep telling us your feedback. We appreciate it. We love it, especially those of us in the community on the training team. We love to hear your thoughts. And so if you want things that are different, if you want things to be developed, etc., please let us know. We can feed it back, and we can definitely, hope to see some of these kind of things in the future. Also, hey to Jess, if you're still here. Hi, Jess. Thanks for joining. It's great to see you. So I'm just having a little look through. Zach had a question. I'm trying to make condensation with a cloner, but my objects don't rotate currently. How to make it rotate in the current direction. So what I do is I would first of all model your condensation, a little bit of condensation in the correct orientation. And then when you go into the cloner, if you find that the rotation or the transform space isn't correct, you can just come in and you can transform your clones as a whole in here, just like I did for the grass. So we actually did this. So hopefully that should resolve that for you. So Painted was saying, I believe the display tag would work with Redshift. No. Yes, this would also work. Yeah. So within the Redshift object tag, you can override the visibility if you want to. This is just a different way of doing it. The great thing with 3D, Cinema 4D, and Redshift, there are multiple ways to do the same thing. And Hot Zen Monster, you can do a dissolve. Yes, absolutely. We can do sort of dissolving and transitions and all stuff like that. Cool. Let me just have a little look through. Thanks for the nice comments as well. I appreciate it. Also, sorry for the technical issues, but hey, this is, the joys and the fun of live streaming. A few years ago, I think I'd stress about them, but now it just is what it is, guys. And thank God you're here. Got the amazing community telling me, when my audio doesn't work. Thank God. Where would I be without you all? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you liked it. I have a 58 card. Anything I should know about the PC driver version? I'll be honest with you, I'm a Mac girl. I don't know too much about PCs and drivers, but any of the information that you do want to know for things like Cinema 4D and Redshift, you can go onto the maxon.net page. And if you click under support, we have something called a knowledge base. And so within that knowledge base, you can just search either the requirements that are needed, you can search the drivers that you need, all of this kind of information you can find on there. That is not a problem at all. Yes, you can make particles collide. You can do it with the new liquefy modifier layer in the simulate menu. We can go to modifiers, liquefy, and then when we do liquefy, we have collisions, and it's particle collisions. So yes, you can. So let's have a look. What do you suggest for adding some sway to the grass your transition happens? David, there is a very easy way to do this, and that is on your cloner. So your cloner that's controlling your grass and all of this kind of stuff. If you add a delay effector, so delay effector allows you to add some more spring to things. So just like what we've just looked at, right? We added it inside the fields menu. We added it inside of the track modifier layer. You can do it here. Set the effect to spring and add a little bit of strength, not too much, but a little bit of strength will give that additional kind of like sway and spring. And you might find you quite like that effect. And also, thank you so much, Hot Zen Monster, for that. If anyone doesn't know, I play football, and yeah, I'm enjoying it very much. So thank you so much. As always, it's been a pleasure streaming for you all, with you all. I love it very much. If you have any suggestions for future streams that you want, feel free to drop me a message, drop me an email. I am at @itwaselly on Instagram. So yeah, please do not be strangers. Let me know your thoughts, feedback, anything that you want to see. And I will hopefully see you all on a stream soon. Bye, everyone.